Bonsoir à tous. Merci.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us and for having watched this documentary with great attention. I will now call on Monique Bitubingi to join us. She is also a mixed-race woman from colonization. She was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and she is a plaintiff in a lawsuit against the Belgian state for a crime against humanity. Monique, you're welcome. Monique is accompanied by her daughter.
Voilà, Monique est accompagnée de sa fille, Monique
Is accompanied by her daughter, Monique Fernandez, who will participate in the debate with us because these traumatisms are also family histories who unfortunately are shared generationally. They will tell us about it. In order to understand also the historic part of all of this event, we also have with us Emmanuel Sada, who's a historian at Columbia University in New York. Her research, Emmanuel, please join us. Let us applaud her. Monique, you may move. Emmanuel, whose research has to do with the history of mixed-race children in the French Empire and the history of relations between race and citizenship, particularly on colonial right in the French Empire. And we will also have with us Michel Hirsch, who is a lawyer in criminal code, and she is a specialist of international affairs.
Voilà, Michel Hirsch.
Michel Hirsch is a lawyer in Brussels, and she is also active at the International Criminal Court and is Monique's lawyer. Thank you very much to each of you for being with us. Perhaps in order to start, I will speak with you, Monique. Please tell us about how you feel watching such images. Well, this reminds me of my childhood, everything I have experienced. Could you please tell us in just a few words, Michel, how things happened for you? At what time were you separated from your mother? I remember it very clearly as it had happened yesterday. I was only 4 years old. I was at my grandfather's house, who was a magistrate in the village. And they were living together. My uncle was a great hunter, and therefore we had food. We had meat, as much meat as we wanted. And one day, a white man came to us, and everyone went to talk to him, see him. I did too. My aunt was carrying me on their back. We were calling him the white man. And when I got back, I said that my family was sad. Things had changed. Usually there was joy in our family. We would dance. They had a great atmosphere in our family, but that day everyone was tired, was sad. We went to sleep, and very early in the morning, my grandmother, I couldn't see my mother anymore. My mother had gone because she didn't want to see me leave. My grandmother, my mother, and my young aunt, my uncle, carried me because where we had to go was extremely far. We walked there. My uncle was sad. We walked for days, and on the third day, we arrived in a place where there was a huge event, some sort of a celebration in a white people's house. And we got to this house, and all of a sudden, I couldn't see my family anymore. I looked for them. I looked at each person that were present. I looked at my mother. I looked for my aunt, my grandmother, my uncle. No one was there. And I just started crying. I was there. I couldn't find anyone. And I cried so much that I ended up lying down on the ground. And there was a young girl who was the same color as I. She came looking for me. She gave me a mango. She took me with her. And we left into the place we were confined in. We went there. And we just had to follow. I had to follow. I was 4 years old. I just had to follow the other girls. The food was disgusting. And every afternoon, we as young girls had to go look for sweet potato leaves in the village behind the house where everyone was there, because there weren't any toilets in the village. So everyone in the village would go at the back of the house. But that is where we had to go for look for sweet potato leaves. And we would bring these back. And these leaves were what we were meant to eat together with fufu bowls that we were preparing. We were preparing fufu bowls, and everything else was to be fed to the rabbits. That's what our life was like for an entire life. I mean, I couldn't tell you everything. A day wouldn't be enough.
So I was there, and certainly life was very difficult. We were there in an enclosure. We went to school with the children at school. The children in the village didn't even look at me. There was nothing. We would eat once a day with vegetable and food that we had to find ourselves. There was no more meat to eat. Meat was something we didn't have anymore. And life continued like this until independence.
À quel moment est-ce que vous avez quitté cet endroit?
At what time, when did you leave this area? I left this area at 16 years old. I married at 16 and a half years old. I wanted to try and seek out a better life for myself.
Monique?
Monique, you're called Monique Fernandez. You're named after Monique Bitubiji, your mother, and her daughter. At what time, at what moment were you aware of your mother's history? Were you aware of the traumatic life she held within her? So really being aware of this history was in 2018. Before that, we had some knowledge of what she did when she was little and some reactions she had when she saw some things, for example, some trucks that she would see. She was scared, for example, when she saw the army, for example. We could see her facial expressions change. So this really was some fear inside her. We didn't really know why, what was the reason. Then, in August 2018, that's when we learned of what had happened. But we're already grown up. But why 2018? If you can go back to that time, what exactly happened? And also, I'll put that question to Monique. What was the triggering moment when you were able to talk in that particular time? This is what everyone lived together. They lived through together. I think my mother wanted to wait till her children were older, but then everyone got together and began to talk, and then we began to ask questions. There were some things which came out, and we said, that's not normal, that's not something that should be accepted. They spent so much time keeping it inside. But for them, these are women who are incredibly resilient. They are mixed race women. They've lived through a lot. So they're always used to being very strong. But at that time, we realized that what happened as children isn't right, and it was time to talk about it. Monique, didn't you ever want to talk about this with your children before that time? And in the documentary, Then there's a gentleman in the document who also always refused to talk to his children about it. To what end, he would say. And then his daughter says to him, but don't you think it's better that you should have spoken to us? Can you perhaps explain why you have never put it into words and explain this to your children in order to address what happened with your children? So what happened are we didn't want to make the children upset or traumatized. I wanted to wait until my children were older, and then it was a little easier for them to perhaps understand what had happened. Because for a mother, doesn't want to reveal everything that happened, because not everything was wonderful. I didn't want to tell them everything that had happened. That I waited a long time. You know, should the children have been traumatized? But you also spoke about abuse and violence. We lived through a life that my children really wouldn't be able to understand. We were taken away from our mothers, wrenched away from our mothers, and put in an enclosure because we slept on mats. We didn't have any covers. When we fell ill, there was nothing. And it was the sunshine itself that would cure you, if you like. So I couldn't tell my children that, listen, there are many things that happened that I just couldn't share. Emmanuel Sada, you're a historian on the issue of mixed-race children in colonization, mixed-race children through French colonization. Also, perhaps to get a better understanding of the historical context. How many people were affected and over what period, how much time? Thank you very much. I'd like to underscore Monica's courage, both of them, the mother and the daughter, not only for speaking about this today, but also raising a case against the Belgian state, and Michel Hirsch, who is also all the work ongoing on the trial and this battle. I've worked on this French cases. There aren't any proceedings ongoing in the French case. The mixed-race children, one might say, is at the beginning of European colonization, the first steps of the Spaniards, for example, in the Caribbean. The mixed race and the métis, if you like, comes back from the Spanish colonization in history during modern colonization in the 19th and 20th century. At the end of the 19th century, during the conquest of sub-Saharan Africa by France and Belgians and the Germans and the English, there was a... We don't have the exact numbers, as the film underscores. These are hidden children. This was a population that wanted to be, people wanted to erase, perhaps more in the Belgian case than others. So there isn't a census, there isn't we don't have the figures, we don't have the numbers. And this is clear. The Belgian children have been more affected, if you like, by our and other European cases. There's some type of erasure, if you like, of these children from all communities, whether it's from the African or the Belgian community. So we don't have figures. We have some estimates between 15,000 and 20,000 children during the Belgian colonization. For what reason? And so from historians' point of view, I'd like to know, for what reason, why did this take place? What was the perception of these mixed-race children, which made it necessary, in quotation marks, to justify what happened? So firstly, before the perhaps speak very freely. So the sexuality, you have to talk about it. So these children come about from sex between men and women, which we've seen in the film. They're children from young girls fall pregnant at when they first have their period. So we're talking about rape here. We're talking about abuse of children. There were a number of different modalities of this sexuality, but at the beginning of the colonization, the 30 or 40 years, there weren't European women. The women who arrived in Congo, Burundi, were in the 30s, but before that weren't any women. So there was a service which was made available for men, such as domesticity, and so housewives, for example, which worked for these colonizers who did the housework and also provided other services such as meeting sexual needs of the men. So this comes from multiple faceted relationships. So looking at this through rape and rape of children as well. And also, the state manages these children in different ways. In the Belgian case, there was an attempt to erase these children. In Belgium, there was marriage wasn't forbidden but in other colonies it was forbidden. But that wasn't the case with Belgium. Neither in France. Living together was not seen very positively. But they preferred women instead of prostitutes, sex workers, if you like, because these women could provide a free service, if you like, doing housework, and then also avoidance of other diseases if they were looking for these services elsewhere. So different ways of managing the children in Belgium. There was a way to try and hide these children. They were taken away from their natural environment, as we saw in the film. They were wrenched away from their mothers in a violent way. It was done under the auspices of a legal framework, but these young girls didn't sign anything. Their children were wrenched away from them, and then they were taken to an orphanage. So these were religious boarding schools. This is a particular way of managing, if you like, in quotation marks, to manage this mixed race issue. So this is the responsibility of the Belgian state. I'm neither a lawyer or a judge, but yes, there was This did take place systematically. They wanted to hide these children. This wasn't an accident. It is interesting because Belgians say, they say this was an accident in history. And if I look at a text today of 1923, and the Belgian doctors say that mixed-race children were an accident. But it is not at all an accident. This was a structure that was in place, a system that was in place to manage what had happened. Michel Hirsch, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for being with us and to discuss the question of the mixed-race children of the Belgian colonization who have brought the Belgian state to justice. First question, since we're speaking of Belgian colonization, there's been mixed-race children born of all colonizations. What is the specificity of the mixed-race children of the Belgian colonization? What I have discovered when Monique and 4 others came to me, 4 other grandmothers, mixed-race grandmothers in my office, what I discovered is that I didn't know anything about this history, this part of history, and what we discovered was truly discovered thanks to their testimonies and thanks to document that Monique was able to fetch 40 years ago in the Congolese mission, where she had been, to use the correct word, kidnapped until independence. Sequestered, if you like. What we discovered was a state crime. What we discovered is that the Belgian state, the colonizing state, had implemented a system with the aim of eliminating mixed-race children, with the aim of eliminating all mixed-race children. And this system involved all bodies of the state. This happened before the war, around 1910, 1915, and later. But this system was newly implemented, reinforced after the war, after the Nuremberg Tribunal, and particularly thanks to norms that were adopted by the Belgian Parliament in 1952. And this system requires that mixed-race children be counted, be censored. And there was, in the DRC, in 1948, 47 perhaps, some orders were given to colonial workers to kidnap all mixed-race children by strength, if necessary, to their from their black mothers, for these children to become pupils of the state. There were pupils commissions that were set in place. Children would have their name changed, their first name changed, their date of birth was changed. And these are children who are registered as being born from an unknown father, despite the fact that the children are Van de Mollebroek children who are considered unknown, whose father is considered unknown. And everyone knows this. And with the agreement of the church, of the clergy, and a number of other religious institutions who have accepted to take on children age 3 to 7, only girls, and they decided to take on this, sometimes boys as well, and the Belgian state would pay for these children to be kept, sometimes tens, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away from their families, their original family, their birth family. And that is a crime against humanity. When a state organizes for racial reasons the segregation of children, and I must say that the orders were given for children to be taken away from their mother between the age of 3 and 5, with a number of exceptions. Why were these children taken away from age 3 to 5? Because religious institutions couldn't be bothered taking care of babies who couldn't walk or were not potty trained. And starting age 3 was also the age at which children were weaned down, where breastfeeding would stop. And that is why such young children were kidnapped and not babies. In 1919, Charles Michel, the Prime Minister of Belgium at the time, presented his apologies. He apologized in the name of the federal government to the mixed-race children of the Belgian colonies and their family due to the injustice and suffering they had endured. And 2 years later, it was the Catholic Belgian Church who presented their apologies. And you sued the Belgian state, considering that excuses were insufficient. So before asking you where we stand in terms of the trial, the judicial case, Monique, I would like to ask you, what was the trigger? What was the trigger that at some point you told yourself that you had to go to justice? You had decided to break the silence in which you and your family had lived until then, and you decided to bring this case to the public. We decided to do so because we could no longer keep this for ourselves. It was necessary for the Belgian population to know what had happened in DRC. And also, the state had recognized what had happened. They had apologized. But apologies were not enough. Apologies are not enough. This is a crime against humanity. And it was necessary for the state to be held accountable. The state had to be held accountable. They had to acknowledge that they hurt people. They killed us mentally, physically. And just an apology certainly wouldn't do it. It wasn't enough. An apology is, perhaps if you bump into the street and someone's phone falls on the floor and you apologize to them. That's what you apologize for. But what happened to us is not on the level of an apology. What we need is reparations. The state must provide reparations for the crime they have committed against us. Madame Hirsch, I believe that the legal case was started in 2021, just a bit before that, actually. We pleaded in front of the first instance tribunal in Brussels, and we lost. That's the first instance, first tribunal. And we lost, but the struggle certainly isn't finished. But we lost because the tribunal considered that the kidnapping of children for racial reasons and the system that had been implemented by Belgium, which is not denied, it is actually recognized by the Prime Minister in the excuses that were presented by Charles Michel in the name of the Belgian state to mixed-race children. The judge, the first judge, considered that if to this day we were able to speak of crime against humanity, at the time we couldn't do so. The crime couldn't be described as such at the time. And perhaps following the Nuremberg trial in 1948, obviously there were a number of sentences, then we needed to evaluate the gravity of the facts due to the gravity of crimes against humanity as described in the trial. And therefore, we appealed, and a date was just set in front of the appeal court. It was set for the 17th and 18th of June of this coming year, of this year. We'll continue to fight. I have good hope. We must also see what the consequences would be should the Belgian state be condemned on the basis of a crime qualified as a crime against humanity that would grant losses and damages, reparations to victims, to mixed-race people for crimes committed during colonization. This would be a historical decision. An historical decision also because the crime against humanity is a crime that cannot be outdated. And you speak of history. Emmanuel Saada, should the appeal be retained, what could be the historical impact of both for Belgium and the rest of the world? Because stories such as those of Monique is something that has existed in all countries, and so this could impact other European countries. What would be the historical impact of such a decision? Well, it would have an immense historical impact. First of all, to bring light the history of these children. There are mixed-race children who have been mistreated, to use the mildest possible word, and all the colonies of modern European empires, both in Africa and in Asia, in Australia. as well as in Asia-Pacific islands. And when we add up all of these children, all of these people, they become a great number. It becomes a great number. I mean, it's still a few, only a few people compared to the world population, but this history was hidden. It is still unknown in France, in Belgium, in Italy, throughout all of the European countries. These children's history is hardly known. And I think that the reason for that is that their lives were so affected, the difficulties were so great, the trauma was so great, that it took a lot of time for these children to tell their stories. This is the story of Monique, who tells us that at some point it was no longer possible to keep this experience quiet. And for the longest time, these histories, these stories were kept in silence. And for these individuals, for their children, their grandchildren, it is very important. And therefore, such a decision would be historical in order to bring justice. And when we speak of reparation, on colonial issues, sometimes we speak for a very long duration. We speak of dozens, hundreds of years for questions of slave trade, for instance. One of the arguments that is used against reparations is that it happened so long ago that responsibilities cannot be clarified. But in this case, it's very clear. The people who have experienced this are alive. It is within their body, within their mind. The trauma still exists. So these are not just reparations. It's a matter of loss and damages, and these reparations must be granted these individuals and for their descendants. But more generally, I believe that such a decision would also bring to light the daily violence of colonization. Colonization was done with men and women who were in relations with one another, a violence that was not just a fact of arms and massacres, slave trade, forced labor. All of these violences are extremely visible, but they're also somehow hidden of the relations between men and women who were the daily bread of colonization. And I believe that if such a decision was taken in favor of plaintiffs, mostly women actually as plaintiffs, 5 women, well, I believe that such a decision would also be a way to recognize that the violence of colonization happened in the most intimate space, happened in something that had to do with interrelations between people. That's important. An additional question, if you'll allow me, about this perspective that was brought forth for decades on the way these mixed-race children were seen. What is left of this in European societies among population? What is left? You say this history is hardly known in Belgium, in France, and in other societies, but the violence was such and has affected so many people that I imagine that it necessarily affected all of society. What is left of this today? Well, that is a question to which it is hard to answer. I think that what happened in regards to mixed-race children is that there was a racialization of relations between human beings. And I think mixed racing is not a matter of race. It is the moment at which, when mixed-race children appeared, then people had to define themselves as a race. The Belgians had to describe themselves as white, because at some point they had children with African women, and they had to decide what would be done of these women. And at that time, they had to invite. And it was at a time where the question of white supremacy was produced, this separation. Segregation is the product of such a separation. And fundamentally, and that is one of the reasons I looked into the mixing of races, on a European level, being European, the European identity was built within the colonial world, and it was built within these intimate relationships, through these intimate relationships with colonized populations, and in the way in which the result of such relations were dealt with. In Brussels, there was an institute, which was implemented by the Belgian king, which is the International Colonial Institute, who gathers every year. There are colonial workers from all countries, European, Japanese, Americans, and they're obsessed with the mixing of races. And every 5-6 years, they say, what do we do with mixed race children? What is the reality of mixed race children? And when we read pages and pages who carry awful racism, well, what we see is we are Europeans. We have a way of dealing with this. We have the way of managing such problems. We have a way of looking at race. And it is absolutely amazing to see that this European awareness is done on the idea of mixed racing.
Michel Hirsch, for your clients, you've obviously asked for redress and reparation. These are also financial redress. Perhaps a few words, if you can. What have you asked for your clients against the Belgian state? So we've asked for a amount, and we've asked an expert as well. So you're looking for moral justice. So why have we asked for this derisory amount? It is because we don't have a lot of faith in the justice system, and if we were asked for a significant amount, and then we lose, that is what happened at the lower court, then a percentage of the amount that we ask for
sera payé
will be paid by the plaintiffs to the Belgian state. Therefore, we've asked for 50,000 euros at a provisional level, because if not, then the legal fees will be too high. Thank you very much. Madame Sada, we have spoken about redress for the victims, also redress for history. What type of redress might be possible in history for society, for people? The question is certainly a difficult one. Firstly, you have the matter of truth, of teaching, of sharing this history. It needs to be communicated. There was a commission by the Belgian Parliament which asked a commission of historians in 2022 of a 600-page report on the history of colonization by Belgium. There are 2 pages only on mixed races, perhaps page 220, 222, I think.
Il faut faire beaucoup plus
We need to do much more.
de travail historique.
We need more work on history and historical aspects. We need to undertake interviews with these women, with the men,
Dont la vie a été
whose lives have been absolutely shattered by the experience they've lived through. We need to have these interviews. We need to record history and to share it as much as possible. I think the truth isn't enough here. If the truth were enough, it would be easier. So we also need material redress. I really think this is an important matter, and I really hope that this trial is going to be worth it. We have to reflect on collective justice. If this trial is successful, perhaps let me just redraft my question. This judicial case, I haven't looked at it very closely. Will it be looked at closely by European countries? What might be the fallout for these countries who have not raised judicial proceedings? What would be the fallout from this? So there hasn't, in the French case, there hasn't been a case particularly, but only from Côte d'Ivoire. The French case, which is similar to Congo, Burundi, and Rwanda, is the Vietnamese reforms about 5,000 children who were torn away from their mothers during the Indochina War and who were forcibly sent away. Sometimes they're not even given French nationality, so they were taken away from their mothers and they were put in religious institutions. And I've worked with a lot of these children. When I worked with them, they weren't no longer children, of course, but there still are injured, unaffected children. They didn't raise a complaint or a case. So this is for European countries, for example. This is something that needs to be followed very closely by them because there might be significant fallout from this, if I understand correctly. Also, there is a possibility that the Belgian state will adopt a law on reparation. And this is also something that we have asked for. Monique Biti-Bingi, I'm going to turn towards you and your daughter. We do have a few more moments before we turn to Q&A from the audience, which I'm sure will be a number of questions, but I just want to apologize in advance for putting my question in such a frank way. But for you, what is the importance of this judicial redress when we know that this outcome won't remove your pain? But why is this so important that justice is brought to bear on this? This is really important for us. Because they took away our dignity, our childhood was robbed from us, it was violated. Because our father was known as the state. So it's so important for us. Monique Fernandez, as Monique's daughter, so the second generation, there are thousands like yourself, and you're here with your mother and you're fighting alongside her. What, in your view, is the importance as a child of a recognition of what took place? It's of paramount importance that my mother has validation that her life wasn't a mistake. What really bothers me is that the Belgian state says, I'm sorry for the mistakes that happened in the past, but we're talking about a human life here. But it's a human life, not just a mixed race. There is a value. This is a person with feelings who was wrenched away from her home, everything, a home that was full of love. She had a mother. She didn't ask for all those problems. There was a problem that was based purely on color, so it's extremely important for me that she has this recognition. So it is a crime that was committed. It is a crime against humanity that was committed. And now she is fighting for her history to be recognized. An identity, her heritage, her past, and part of her future, which was all taken away from her. It is so extremely unfair. You can't just say sorry for something like that. We know that it was certainly very traumatic, and this goes from generation to generation. That is why I wanted to ask you, in a more personal level, you, in your view, you're Monique Biti-Bingi's daughter, what are you expecting from these redress in order for you to be able to rebuild as a daughter to a mother who has suffered so much? It's certainly very difficult because I was born in Belgium. I was brought up there. I love Belgium. But when you look at me, I'm not part of Belgium. In Belgium, I'm seen as black, but when I'm in Africa, I'm seen as a white person. So I don't have this identity because I almost feel like I don't belong to any country. So this is of paramount importance for me.
encore un peu répéter.
I don't want to repeat myself too much. Is it important for you to have a Congolese identity
Une construction
and to rebuild your personal life, perhaps to try and release some of the trauma you've lived through? Yes, absolutely. Yes, now, because we are fighting this fight, we haven't had all the responses, we haven't yet had closure on this. We want the Belgian state to be held accountable. That, then, will be closure. That will be good for Belgium, but also for those of mixed race as well. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation to join us this evening, Monique, and to be able to talk about such a painful experience. And Monica Fernandez, who was there with you, and Michel Hirsch and Manuel Sada. And in June, we will see the appeal, and we will certainly follow this very closely. And Emmanuel Sada, you're a specialist, an expert in the history of mixed-race children and colonization. Thank you very much to all. So any questions from the room? We have a roving mic in the room. Please just raise your hands, and we'll give you the microphone, and then you can raise your questions with the panelists.
Merci de, quand vous aurez le micro, de bien vouloir vous présenter.
When you have the microphone, please let us know to whom you would like to raise your question. I'm Danielle Prénant. I'm a human rights specialist from women, children, indigenous people, etc. My question is the following for Michel Hirsch. Criminal law is not retroactive unless there is a statute of limitations. In Belgium law, crimes against humanity, is there a statute of limitations on that? And for Madame Sada, the film shows that one of the aims, objectives of child segregation was also to protect them. Perhaps not in Belgian Congo, but in other countries, the mixed-race children, when the colonizers left, were they discriminated against? When we know the history of albino people, for example, the difference in color of their skin they might fall victim to discrimination. But I'd like to thank everyone for the questions as well. It's been a very interesting debate. Thank you.
Maître Hirsch, est-ce qu'en droit belge...
Michel Hirsch. So in Belgium, in crimes against humanity, is there a statute of limitations? Yes, of course. Like everywhere, of course.
Mais nous n'avons pas déposé une plainte pénale.
Yet we haven't filed a criminal lawsuit. We're filing a complaint, a suit against the Belgian state for crimes against humanity. And the civil case has a statute of limitations because it stems from an infraction.
Sur la protection des...
On the protection of children.
Dans une certaine mesure, dans toutes les colonies.
In all the colonies where decolonization was conflictual, the children were objects. They were
Des conflits. Et par exemple, au Vietnam,
in the stakes in the conflict. So in Vietnam, the children were repatriated.
se souciaient de leur sort après l'indépendance.
So their fate was left pending after the independence. So in the Belgium case, one of the...
Non pas le témoignage, mais dont on rapporte les propos.
When we...
Cette vision...
Some people had the vision, but I think in the Belgian case,
l'entreprise d'effacement de ces enfants.
There was this systematic erasure of these mixed race children
De les faire disparaître et en fait,
to make them disappear, if you like, to send them to Belgium to make them disappear. And they were felt subject to forced adoptions. Some of them were not considered adoptable.
I also wanted to add that in the case of Belgium, children were not meant to be repatriated. It was at the time of independence that a number of religious institutions were evacuated towards Belgium, and it is the case of Save. But it was not the case for Monique. Most stayed in DRC. It was not in any way imagined that they would return. That is why the link, the family link, was broken, because these children were seen as a threat for Belgian families, a threat for the supremacy of the white race, as you have said, and also a threat for colonies, because one would imagine that these children with white blood in their veins may one day demand, reclaim a power that was in the hands of white people only. And this is one of the great fantasies of colonization, to one day see the mixed-race children take vengeance against their parents, their fathers, by leading nationalist struggles. This is a fear and a schema that we see throughout colonizations, French and other European colonizations. This fear of mixed-race children, which continues in the current political history of the Democratic Republic of Congo, when, for instance, mixed-race children, when mixed-race people run in elections, we speak of the clan of mixed-race people. So something is indeed left over in the political history of Congo and perhaps others. Are there any other questions in the room? You may also ask your questions in English if you'd like.
Bonsoir.
Good evening. My name is Hugo Froger. I am originally from Réunion. And when I saw this documentary, it made me think of another event of history of Réunion and Overseas Department, which is the time of the MIDOM, in a post-colonial context where children were also being torn away from their families, children who had families who were sent to metropolitan France, sometimes for domestic work, sometimes to be adopted in other families. And therefore, my question to Mrs. Saada is whether this phenomena, these events, are now over, or when did it truly stop? Or is it a history that is sadly continuing? Thank you. I don't think it's going on. I mean, it is a recent history. The children of Réunion, specifically in Réunion, who were brought by Michel Debré, a prime minister at the time, who sent hundreds of children to repopulate the region of Creuse that he was the governor of. And there were issues in French countrysides where there was a lack of population because there was a migration to urban areas, as well as a loss of birth following post-World War II. And so they said that they were saying there are mothers who are unable to take care of their children in Réunion. That was his opinion. That was obviously not a reality. And therefore, we're going to take them to France. And therefore, in France, there were hundreds of children. It's a beautiful book by a historian called Yvan Jabonka, who speaks of this part of history, this question of children torn away from their mothers, torn away from their own roots. This is something that's quite universal in colonial context. In the U.S., we've often heard of American Indians, of indigenous people who have been placed in orphanages, between brackets. I mean, obviously they were not orphans, but in religious institutions that were sent to be made proper Americans, proper Canadians. There are similar stories in Australia. So there is something quite universal about this idea of colonizing through children, to take children and to use them as tools for colonization. But I think that the Belgium case is a case of a specific cruelty and of a specificity due to its duration, which is quite exceptional. And unless I am mistaken, both Australia and Canada have granted reparations. Not the United States, but specifically in Australia and in Canada, you're right. And this was done via legislation. There were the Nabo case in the early 70s, so it's quite old. So there is an awareness that is quite much older in Australia. And then there was following this case, there was legislation that was passed. Good evening. My name is Lena. Thank you very much for this discussion and for this film. I have a question for you, Mrs. Monique Bitubingui, as well as for Mrs. Hirsch. I hope that the appeal will be successful, both for you and for everyone else. And my question is, what if it isn't? Are there any other possibilities to obtain justice, to seek justice? Or should this not work, how will you pursue other legal options, if any? Well, first of all, we'll try to win. Let's think of that first.
Monique, est-ce que vous voulez ajouter quelque chose?
Monique, did you want to add something? What could I add?
J'aimerais bien vous demander, vous êtes une maman?
I would like to ask you, you're a mother. You're a mother of 2 children. What if something like that were to happen to you? What would your reaction be? If someone came and take your 4-year-old child away from you to mistreat them
En tant que maman, qu'est-ce que vous
as a mom, as a mother,
pouvez me donner?
could you tell me, and could you give me an answer as to what you would do? No, I cannot. Well, I'm asking this of all mothers now. I'm asking all of you if you're able to give me an answer. To all mothers, if one was to take your 4-year-old child away from you, your 4-year-old girl away from you, one was to take her away, one was to mistreat her
Jusqu'à subir des viols?
to the point of raping her
En tant qu'une mère, qu'est-ce que vous
as a mother, what would you do?
J'aimerais bien une réponse.
I would like for someone to answer this question. That's all. That's all I have to say.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions dans la salle?
Are there any other questions in the room? We still have a bit of time for questions from the room. There is someone in the front asking for the microphone. Good evening. My name is Nigel, and I thank you. I was wondering, how was this film created? How everything you are doing, how is that heard or perceived by the Belgian population? Are they denying the reality? Are they, on the contrary, are they supporting you? How is the Belgian population reacting to this? What is their position? To whom are you addressing your question? Or who would like to answer this question rather?
Dans ce genre,
In these types of cases, the role of the media is essential. And through the media, I believe that we may be able to share the struggle that is led notably by Monique. Monique has accepted to testify several times in front of the media, and it must be known that it requires lots of courage to tell her story over and over, because telling one story is re-experiencing that story, those facts. And every time, she, as well as the other plaintiffs, have had the courage to do so. But the roles that media play and that they may continue playing is absolutely essential and will determine how this unfolds. Thank you very much, Michel Hirsch. I believe we've reached the end of this session. Perhaps one last question. Thank you. My name is Annie. Thank you for these testimonies. My name is Annie. Thank you for this testimony, which is necessary, crucial, and that I believe everyone should hear. I have a question in regards to the mother, and I will turn to Michel Hirsch for this question. Do the mothers, are the mothers who undergone such experiences, are they taken into account? Is there an effort to find them? How is the Belgian state treating them? No. There are many other families, many other mixed-race people, but we lead this struggle for the 5 plaintiffs whom we have received in my legal office a few years ago. This will certainly not prevent the struggles to be led for others, but such struggles will come in their own time. My name is Eva. I am Belgian and from Rwanda. And first of all, I would like to thank you for everything you do and for the brilliance that comes out of your minds and your words. And before asking my question, I wanted to speak of the fact that there is a huge impact, great repercussions on numerous generations. I have some very close friends who had grandparents, grandmothers, grandfathers who were in Save, who underwent these experiences, and despite later having several children, grandchildren, entire families, 3, 4 generations of families have been immensely impacted by these realities. And some of these people have now passed, but I think you also carry their words, their history. And so in their name, I'd like to thank you. Then I also have a more specific question. Is there, or might there be, the possibility of collaborating or to look into what may be the responsibility of colonized states, where steps taken in regards to Rwanda or Congo? Is there any support? Is it possible to look into other answer than that of the Mwami, who at the time said we will not do anything about it, saying those are white people's children and the white should therefore decide about them? But is there now the possibility of asking such a questions, perhaps to the parliament in Kigali or in Kin, or might we ever be heard that way? Thank you. I do not know. I truly do not know. I'm not sure we've reached that point. I think it will take time, lots of time. That's all I can say right now. Michel Hirsch?
Je comprends pas tout à fait la question.
I do not entirely understand the question. Are you speaking of the responsibility of Congo and Rwanda? Well, yes, in the sense that mothers from Rwanda and Congo, those are their children too. Could we perhaps, I mean, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, and I haven't experienced this personally, but perhaps you, on a personal level, might you feel supported or request the support or perspective or an intervention in regards to your grandmothers, in the name of your grandmother or your mother? And do you think her voice could be heard that way? I don't know. I'm not sure whether she's still alive. Would it change anything?
Perhaps a word from these states on their history. Is that right? Not at the legal level. Okay.
Nous, ce que nous faisons, c'est une procédure judiciaire.
So we have a judicial proceeding in place against the Belgian State.
D'autres responsabilités,
If there are other
à notre niveau, on
responsibilities at our level, then
aussi de l'Église.
we can also look towards the church to be held accountable.
Et voilà.
Le combat doit être divisé
So the fight needs to be
à plusieurs niveaux différents. Merci beaucoup.
shared out at various different levels. Thank you very much, one and all, for this enriching conversation this evening.
Et merci encore
I'd like to thank Monique and her daughter Monique as well for their bravery and the dignity to share their history with us this evening. Thank you.